Welcome to the Creativity Lab, the podcast that shows how to channel your creativity to live your best, most beautiful life. And now here's your host, Director of the Creativity Lab at West Los Angeles College, Harvard PhD, TV writer, and Professor, Dr. Catherine Boutry.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Each episode, we discuss creative challenges. Today, I have the privilege of talking to Los Angeles-based architect Peter Mitsakos about trusting your gut and staying true to your creative vision while engaging the client in the design process. He'll also discuss what defines good architecture, as well as his belief that the most anti-creative thing in the world is fear. As West Edge Architect's principal architect, Peter has planned, designed, managed, and overseen construction for an impressive range of projects in the academic, institutional, and private sectors over the past 35 years. Peter, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Can you walk me through the journey? How does one become an architect? What was that like for you?
When you're in your senior year of high school and you're supposed to be picking a college, and you would pick a college based on your major, and you would pick a major based on what you want to do with your life, and I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. And so I went to see my guidance counselor. I don't know if your students know what a Rolodex is, but it's a little card file with different things on it, like people's names and addresses, or in this case, a list of careers, and it's in alphabetical order. And he just starts, well, how about accounting? And I'm like, no. And then anyway,
so I see now why you're not a zookeeper.
Yeah, right. We would have never gotten there. Right? So, he said architecture, and he just kept going, and I went, wait, stop, say that again, and I hadn't thought of it, but as soon as he said it, I thought it sounded like something I'd be interested in. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that things that I liked and things that I'm good at.
What are those things? Because people might be curious to know. What is a sign that one is an architect?
I always like to draw, and whenever my family went to the beach, I'd spend the whole day making a giant sandcastle. And you meet all kinds of interesting people as you're gradually taking over all the real estate, right? I'm also very good at imagining things in 3 dimensions, in space. My dad was an air traffic controller, and especially when he was doing it, they didn't have the instruments and tools that they have now. So you had to keep in your head where all these planes were, in the air, and so they don't crash into each other.
Sure.
And so I got that from him. I'm really able to do that when somebody gives me like a math problem or a riddle or something. I'm just imagining the elements kind of in space in relationship to each other. And so when we're working on drawings or whatever, I'm constantly sort of projecting up into 3 dimensions. I like the sort of physicality of drawing with my hand, like I draw with pencils, I draw with pens, I draw with crayons, right? You name it, right? When my daughter was really young, and I would take her to her preschool class, and I'd look around and I'd realize, okay, the furniture's smaller and we have pointy scissors, but basically it looks like my office. and we make cardboard models, which are fun to do and very engaging, right? So I like that. A lot of people coming out of school are so skilled with the computer programs and working inside the computer that they may have similar kind of experience in terms of developing ideas right directly on the computer. That's not for me, but it works with both of us, with me contributing the way I contribute and them contributing the way they contribute.
I find architects really fascinating because it's one of those professions where you have obviously a really, really strong theoretical and artistic, creative side, but you have to match that with practicality, unless you're just making theoretical plans for things, right? So was that ever an issue for you? Do you like one part more than the other? Do you like solving problems in situ? Do you like solving problems better. Well, I guess everyone likes solving problems before they happen, right? Theoretically,
Yeah.
more. But, how do those two things combine for you?
You need both of those. I like having both of those. I don't, anybody who has an idea about an architectural idea, it doesn't necessarily come from a practical place with the building they've asked me to design. In the end, right, you have to have all the rooms in the right places. You have to have, not just a great classroom, but also, a hallway and restrooms and people have to be able to get out in a fire, and they have to, and it can't rain inside the classroom when it's raining outside, all that kind of stuff. So I actually like both of those things. Those are kind of in the design world. There's another side to it, which is just the business world. The one thing that I didn't understand really is the business side of things. And because first off, they don't teach you that in architecture school, and you really don't learn too much of it working for other people in particular kinds of roles, right? So, but the reality is, if you're not successful on the business side, you don't get to do anything.
Right.
Right. And so you've got to figure out a way that works. I'd say the biggest lesson that I learned, and this is what I would tell your students or anybody who is wanting to do kind of anything really, is that it may be that you don't know, and there are these models out there that you kind of try, but you really should follow your own instincts and your gut and do the things the way you want to do them, and that's the business side of things and the making buildings side of things. And I wouldn't separate, one is not creative and the other uncreative. Believe me, you put all your creativity into keeping your business going.
Right.
You do, right? How do I get this job? How do I attract clients that will like me for who I am instead of who they want me to be? That is not easy, and that's as big a creative problem as just trying to decide how to make an auditorium.
So how do you negotiate that tension between, I really need this work right now because I'm supporting a firm and employees, and this client wants me to build what I think is a monstrosity, and the client's always right, versus I'm actually right and I have a creative vision and I could make this amazing, but I might lose the proposal.
When you realize that it's not going to go well, the sooner you stop working for that person, the better. It just keeps getting worse, and it's challenging. There are definitely times where I took work in order to be able to keep the office going, but because that work was not suited for us because the client's values were so different than ours, when we thought we did something positive, they were not thinking that. And it's not a question of money. It's not like, well, we have a budget of so many thousands of dollars or so many millions of dollars, and you've done it twice. That's not it. It's, you can meet their budget, but you're not your sensibilities are just not well aligned with theirs, and it's they're not happy, you're not making money, you're not, right? Every one of those choices ended up costing me more money than I made.
And you're not getting joy.
Yeah, and there's no joy coming from it. So that's actually it's taken me long enough to realize that you have to be true to yourself. You have to be the person that you want to be. That all has to come out, because that's how you do your best work. And then people see that and are attracted to that. There's a pretty famous graphic designer who talked about never working for bad clients, because if you work for a bad client, you will only get a worse client. So it's like, don't do it. even, and, he says it with an Italian accent. And it's like, even if you are starving, don't do it. It's like, and I have to say he's right. It's like something will come out, and the more true to yourself you are, the more attractive to the people that you actually want to work with you are.
Does the responsibility of someone, children, students, if you're working in a school, living, using the space that you create, the responsibility of that, does that ever keep you up at night?
I think to be a good designer, you have to be a pretty empathetic person, right? You have to be able to sort of see things from other people's point of view. If you're doing a school, it's like, well, the teachers and the students, what's their experience? And that all of that sort of goes into the little cauldron of inputs, and then something comes out as an idea to organize whatever it is. Like, this would be great if we, if everything was oriented towards this, beautiful landscaped hillside, or something, right? Something, or there's a place where everyone comes through here, coming and going every day, so everybody sees each other, and it becomes this really active, joyous place where things that you don't plan on happen, which are all sort of positive and enriching. Like, those I think are the opportunity, and that's where the design idea comes from. The things that keep me up at night are, like the practical side of things. It's like, oh, did we understand that code requirement properly?
They're so complicated.
Yeah, because they're not straightforward, or I think this is in the budget, right? Because you have to meet those requirements, right? There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and the sooner you understand what's pushing and driving those things, the more control you have over them. But
do you feel like the constraints increase your creativity, or do you feel like they stifle it?
For something to be creative, it has to be directed at something. I think it's a misconception where people think creativity is impractical or superfluous or decorative. It's none of those things. How do we make a place that really works for people and is a joy to be in? Things like, okay, we have so many people here that we have to have 4 exits, and they have to be a certain width, so everyone can get out in a fire, and those kinds of things. They're just things that you need to know and need to be considered when you're generating your ideas, right? But not the primary idea. Just, the primary idea is, what's it like to be here, and why are we here, and how does this express that, and what's the experience that we want people to have? And then after that, it's like, all right, what's the sort of device that you're using to achieve those things? And then you start considering, it's like, well, wait, how are we air conditioning this place,
I know that you've gone on record for saying that you enjoy an open design process, and you're talking about it now. At what point in the conception of the building that you're hoping to create do you involve the client? Do you have an idea first and then share it and modify, or do you have the sort of end user conversation first and then go to the drawing? How does that work usually?
You can divide any kind of design task in different phases too, into 2 parts. There's the what to do, and there's the how to do it. Right? The what to do, I really want to engage the client, and that comes first. It's like, what are you wanting to do? I mean, when that client was telling me, hey, I want this place to be a sanctuary. I want to be able to. I want to feel at peace. I want to feel protected. Those kinds of things, right? It's I want to feel like I'm connected to nature, right? that's all what to do.
Right.
The how to do it, I'm less interested in people's opinions. I really,
Well, you're the expert. That
it's
makes
like,
sense.
yeah, because in the end, right, it's like, okay, the how includes what's this thing made of? How is it standing up? Will that actually meet the budget? Right? Because you could have any kind of idea, right? I think this should be an upside down pyramid. Okay, right? That's probably going to cost more than a right side up pyramid, right? So if you tell me I'm responsible for the sort of practical kinds of things, you can also then tell me what the idea is. Like that doesn't work, right? Because it's like, okay, I heard what you want to do, what you're trying to achieve, what your goals are, what the experience is that you're hoping for. All right, I'm going to take that and combine it with my impressions of the site and how the sort of vibe I get from it, and at this point my life experience, right, of like how people are affected in certain places and all of that, and I take all of that and come up with an architectural idea.
The how.
Right?
That's the best answer I've ever heard
how.
to that question of how, of where the theoretical meets the practical.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the what is the theoretical, and the how is the practical.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect marriage there. I understand that perfectly. What defines good architecture for you?
Architecture that is authentic, that is honest about the way it's made, that it's not trying to look like something else. I really don't like buildings that are pretending to have been built in Venice in 1471 and they're in Arizona. I don't like, I think buildings that are very wasteful, that use materials in ways that it's just super inefficient, and I don't really care if the client has all the money in the world and can afford to be wasteful. It's irresponsible, and it doesn't excess doesn't lead to more beautiful things. It really doesn't, So I think for me that's I also think architecture that's respectful of its context. You're not screwing your neighbor, or looming over it, and I think you need to be sensitive to those things, I think.
And I know that being a lead architect is really important to you, and being sensitive to the environment and constraints. Is that a personal? How did that come about?
The reality of the way we've been utilizing resources and throwing our trash out, it's just we can't keep going.
So how does
Right?
that translate into your everyday work?
Well, I think we try and be as responsible as we can be on a number from a number of viewpoints, right? I mean, the first is are these materials kind of responsibly sourced? What's the carbon footprint? And I'll just tell you, it is really hard. There's so much kind of BS over what products' characteristics are with regards to that, what their real carbon footprint is, all that. We're looking at concrete panels that from a company, in America to use on a project. But it turns out, right, that they actually make them in Germany, ship them to Michigan, do some fabrication on them in Michigan, and then ship them, somewhere else to have something else happen. It's like, and these things are heavy, so it just really piles up. But anyway, we try and do that. We try and be as energy efficient as we can be, and there are ways to do that. I mean, the orientation and configuration of a building have more impact on how much energy is going to be used to air condition it than almost anything else you can do.
Oh, wow.
You know, and then there are other things. I also say, the most sustainable thing you can do is reuse an existing building. It's harder to do that. Honestly, it's really more difficult to use something that's already there than it is to knock it down and build a whole new one. But, you're not, think of all the concrete from the foundations that you're not having to redo. Think of all the, the structure that you're not having to redo, right? All of that stuff. So it's also trying to imagine, how to be as light as possible in moving forward. And we have to do a way better job than we've been doing, but that's how it impacts it.
If we had any community college students listening who wanted to become architects, what would you say to them? What's the best way to go about it?
Well,
if they don't have a Rolodex.
Well, the great thing about this architecture is there's more than one way to become an architect, right? There's actually a way to become an architect where you don't have to have an accredited degree in architecture. You have to work longer for someone who's already licensed, right? And you have to pass the test, right? But there's a few ways to do it. I mean, when I went to school, I had an accredited professional degree, which meant that I had to work a minimum of 30 months before I was eligible to even, pass the last part of the exam. I'll say that it took me twice that long to feel like I was able to pass the last part of the exam, right? But if you don't have a 5-year degree and you have a 4-year degree, you have to work a little bit longer. And I honestly think that you actually don't really need a full degree in order to do it. You just have to work longer. I think, if you work 8 years, you're eligible to take the test. If you pass the test, you can be an architect. So I think that there are multiple routes into it. Now, I would say that there are things that you get out of going to an architecture school that if you can do it, do it. I mean, beyond the things you might learn about history and theory or the way building systems work, there's also your colleagues, right? My classmates are still my best friends. And we in architecture school, you go through all the classes as a cohort, which means and so you stay up 3 days in a row trying to finish stuff with the same people, right? You form some bonds, and those people are invaluable to you in multiple ways, in finding a job, in having support when you lose your job, all the kinds of things that those kinds of friendships are for. So.
Last question I wanted to ask you, how do you keep growing in your creativity in your work? How do you keep finding new joy, new creativity in life and work as an architect?
It's funny because of you, right? I got involved with the creative studies program, and I just started really looking into, well, what does anybody mean by creativity? And I've done a lot of thinking about it, and I think that there are things that we carry with us that get in the way, and as you become aware of them, you're able to deal with them. And one of the things I think, like the most anti-creative thing in the world is fear, right? Like the most anti-creative force
I agree with
is fear. If you are afraid that you won't be finished on time, if you're afraid that what you're thinking about won't work, if you're afraid of all kinds of things, if you're afraid of success, if you're afraid of failure, if you're afraid of any of these things, it keeps you, if you're afraid of not having enough work in the office to pay everybody, if any of those things keeps you from really being who you are and finding the things that really work.
Have you struggled with fear, and how did you overcome it?
By recognizing it and realizing, I spent a lot of time sort of preparing for the worst. And, part of the problem with that is that the worst kind of happens because you're so ready for it. And so I don't do that anymore. I think, if you're lucky, you keep growing your whole life. And of course, in any profession, right, you're wanting to keep up with whatever is happening, whether it's new or different materials that are available, or if it's different, software tools, if it's whatever it is, whatever sort of the thinking is, you want to be current, But I think more important than that is being aware of your own sort of personal growth and where you need to grow.
I love that. That's super inspirational. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I really thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.